We got to talk about something that I think has really made our nation kind of pause for a moment, and that is the death of Charlie Kirk, who was shot and killed yesterday. It happened in Utah. And joining us now to really kind of delve deep into this topic is Tom Mockaitis. He's a professor at DePaul University studying history there. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Let's talk about this, Tom. You know, this was one of those instances that I think, you know, really shocks the nation, stuns the nation, makes us rethink everything that we've seen in political news. Bring us up to speed about everything that has transpired, I would guess, within the last 15 or so hours.
They're closing in on the perpetrator. It seems quite clear. They found the weapon. They have other evidence. They even have some kind of a description. So I suspect we will learn a great deal more, probably by the end of the day, certainly by tomorrow. But I think the thing to point out, this is only the latest in a series of these attacks, which indicate how deeply divided and polarized we are, and how violence is becoming an increasingly normal response among some people, and sadly cheered by others as a way of dealing with disagreement. And that does not bode well, you know, for peace and harmony in what was a stable democracy, and I hope will continue to be.
Let's talk about this, Professor, because you are talking about that political violence that we've seen unfold in the U.S. We saw the assassination attempt on President Trump. Now we actually have this instance of where Charlie Kirk was killed. What do you think that does historically when we look at the political landscape of the United States as we try to move forward from all of this?
Well, we should also add the assassination of the Speaker of the Minnesota House and her husband, and the wounding of two other people. I think it means that, you know, we have gotten to the point where sadly our political leaders are demonizing anyone who disagrees with them. And that unfortunately creates a climate of hostility. There were always going to be unstable people in this country, and sadly there's, you know, far too easy access to firearms. There will always be a minority who will take that as a call to arms. But anytime someone is criticized, they tend to get death threats. Anytime a judge, you know, rules against the president and he demonizes them, that judge gets death threats. You know, we had recently the murder of the son of a judge. So, you know, I think this is sadly an escalating trend, which is very, very worrying. And I'm very concerned that there might be retaliatory killings, or at least attempts, as a response to this particular incident, this assassination of this very popular, you know, far-right influencer and activist.
You know, Tom, I haven't been on the planet for a very long time, but looking at the history of our country, have we ever gotten to a point where it's been, I would say, this bad? Because this is pretty bad. Have we ever gotten to a point in our country where we've seen these type of attacks? You mentioned the Minnesota lawmakers there, Nancy Pelosi's husband. We can't forget that either. Have we ever seen anything like this happen, looking at the history of our country?
Yeah, actually we have. In the beginning of the 20th century, we had the anarchist movement. Remember, we had President McKinley assassinated by an anarchist. And there was the Wall Street bombing, and there were other incidents as well. The Haymarket incident, you know, from say the 1890s through about 1920 was a very uncertain period of time. So we have gone through periods. Of course, we did have the American Civil War and so on. So there have been periods of violence. But what we have now that is a game changer is social media and the internet that make it possible to spread extremist ideology very, very rapidly. I'm less concerned that there are a handful of individuals willing to engage in this sort of activity at the response, you know, on both sides to the instance when they occur, cheering it on, or saying the person got what they deserve, or saying, well, the individual, you know, was himself, you know, an agitator. This is really not helpful. No matter what you thought of Charlie Kirk, the time now is to say we categorically condemn all forms of political violence, full stop, and don't do the yes but, which unfortunately is becoming too common. And, you know, we've seen the same thing on the right, where there was not the same degree of outrage over the murder of the children in, again in Minnesota, and also the murder of the Speaker of the House. So, I don't know everyone knows what the issue is, what the problem is. How we're going to move out of it is really problematic. It's going to take some kind of bipartisan effort, and I'm not seeing any encouraging signs of that.
You mentioned people spewing hate online. There's a lot of that, definitely after Charlie Kirk's death. Some people celebrating this. What do you think, I guess, looking at the overall landscape, because I do think a lot of this hate is fueled on social media. What do you think? Because it's like this hard conversation to have between free speech and, speech that oversteps the line and goes into violence. What do you think needs to happen there? Because that is where a lot of this stuff is being pushed.
Well, there is no desire on the part of anybody to try and regulate online activity. I mean, when it was Twitter, there were guardrails. Well, now that's become X, there aren't. And in many of the other platforms, Facebook or Meta has in fact relaxed its standards on this kind of stuff. So there really isn't anything like a consensus as to what restrictions there ought to be. And then, as I said, unfortunately, you have politicians who have essentially mainstreamed hate speech, have made it acceptable to express these extremist views. And then, as I said, you throw in our gun culture, and it is not the least bit surprising to me that these incidents occur. I think it's a combination of things that are going to be necessary to get us out of this. But and you mentioned before, I mean, we had a wave of assassinations in the 1960s, starting with John Kennedy, going through Martin Luther King Jr. and through Bobby Kennedy, 3 high-profile assassinations in less than a decade, within a period of 5 years, really. So, I'm always hopeful that we will get beyond this, but it's going to take something of a concerted effort. And what we saw on the floor of the House of Representatives yesterday was not encouraging. In terms of the behavior of representatives on both sides of the aisle.
Charlie Kirk had an amazing ability to really galvanize the youth, no matter what you thought about, those conversations that he would have with the youth. Let me ask you this, because we did talk about people being hateful online, some people disagreeing, some people calling Kirk racist, homophobic. How do you have those conversations and have them in I would say, a respectful political discourse?
Well, I mean, this is something we struggle with on American campuses. We try to teach our students, exactly that. How do you reason from evidence? How do you disagree with a person without treating the person as an undesirable other? And again, you can say, and there's evidence to support it, that he was racist, homophobic, anti-Semitic, and a bunch of other stuff. But nothing in that means that he deserves what happens. That's my objection. Is this isn't the time really to be bringing all that up. The time is to say, full stop, this is simply wrong, and we condemn it. And just leave it at that. And then we can move on, and say, okay, now let's talk about how we dampen down rhetoric. But there's a great deal of political capital to be gained by this. We just saw it in the last presidential election. That the president has made, has never really restrained himself in terms of how he voices his animosity to those who cross him, who disagree with him, and so on. And there are others as well who do that. But I mean, to me, one of the classic example was, last night, we condemn all this, and then you start talking about these far left conspiracies, which we don't have any evidence even existing. I think it's going to be quite clear this was an individual acting on his own. I would lay even money on that. We'll find out the details of his motive, when they apprehend him, assuming they apprehend him alive, which they will certainly try to do.
Well, very interesting point you bring up there, Professor Mockaitis. Not to interrupt you, but the FBI has just released pictures of this person of interest. You see it right there on your screen. This is the person that they say that they are looking for. There is a manhunt underway looking for this person right now. We do know that the FBI was able to recover for a high-powered bolt-action rifle in all of this. And again, they are looking for this person. They say they have good footage of him. You can kind of see him clearly right there. What is that symbol on his shirt? It almost looks like there's some type of symbol there on his shirt that resembles possibly the American flag. But yeah, this is just coming down. Go ahead, Professor.
Yeah, well, see, that's the other thing too. Now we are. I was saying this morning in another interview that I've been doing this for going on 40 years, offering this kind of commentary and study. And what I can say consistently is how our profiles of people are constantly overturned by new evidence. What we're now seeing is the rise of these nihilistic lone wolves who don't have a really coherent ideology. They're driven by attention seeking. They're wanting to make a bold kind of statement. And for example, we saw in the case of the Minnesota school shooter that his comments were all over the place. He was calling for violence against Donald Trump, but he was also spewing a lot of far right, conspiracy theories. So I'm reluctant to draw any conclusions from a T-shirt, but on the other hand, nothing would surprise me now. If they find out this individual was just, I said, a narcissistic nihilist who was interested in, making a dramatic statement, and for him, maybe any target would have been a suitable one, although this clearly required a great deal of planning. But we'll just have to wait and see. And the other surprise, too, is this wasn't an assault rifle. I mean, I can tell you that most snipers use bolt-action rifles because, you can reseat the second round with, greater precision than by simply pulling the trigger on a semi-automatic. So it seems to have been a pretty well-planned thing, and he really did try hard to escape, obviously not hard enough.
You bring up a good point, because you mentioned how oftentimes when the image of the suspect comes out right away, people kind of jump on a political bandwagon instead of waiting for all of the details to come out. Do you think that in part fuels some of this hate that consistently seems to show up in these different scenarios?
There's no question about that. And I've been covering many of these incidents going all the way back to Oklahoma City, TV commentary on this. And people constantly want someone to blame, which is understandable. They want to know, was it a Muslim? Was it a domestic terrorist? Was it, was it a lone wolf? Who was it? And I always have to say, let's wait and see where the evidence takes us. Let's all push pause and wait until we have more information.
Professor, you spoke there earlier about, the historical context, looking at our nation. Charlie Kirk, again, career built around engaging young voters and really shaping the conversation around politics on campuses. How do you think his death will impact really that student movement? When we talk about conservatives and Democrats, we would see people on both sides of the aisle go to that microphone, have that candid conversation. What do you think that looks like moving forward? And will campuses be open to having these sort of events still? I guess you kind of have to. I mean, it is your First Amendment right to do so. But just interesting to see how this could play out, considering what happened on that campus yesterday.
Well, from what we've seen on campuses and what the data upholds is that students perceive a threat to their freedom of speech and have an anxiety over speaking what their mind that is not borne out by the actual threat environment. This is something that's really, really important. A perception of some kind of threat or some kind of intimidation doesn't mean it's real. So that's there as well. But I think is the example being set by our leadership is, it's hard to blame the young people when, you look at the way the responsible leaders are behaving and not behaving. So I think this is going to be, you're going to see more oil dumped on the flames. And a lot of it will depend on what they learn about the motives of this individual. Yeah. I mean, the shooter who took a shot at President Trump was another individual who fit the nihilist pattern. He had voted Democrat, he voted Republican. They really have not figured out what it is. And the biggest mass shooting in American history, the Las Vegas shooter, to this day, we have no idea what his motive was or what he was about or what he was trying to accomplish. And we probably will never find out.
Is it safe to say, Professor, whatever we find out, it is on the shoulders of our political leaders to be very careful in what they say from this
Yes.
point on? This is like a turning point. No pun intended, but it really is.
Yeah. But yes, it is incumbent upon them. But as long as there's political gain to be had by jumping on the extremist bandwagon, then I'm not the least bit surprised that it's going to continue. I mean, before the evidence was even in, the director of the FBI was out there tweeting, "We've got the guy," and all that. It turns out all they did was question a couple of people as quote unquote persons of interest. That always happens in an investigation. So, you know, I mean, the responsible thing would have been said for the president and the leadership on both sides to condemn it, which they did, but then to stop there and say, I appeal to everyone, you know, to please try to damp down the rhetoric. I can remember having this exact same conversation many years ago when, you know, when Gabby Giffords was shot. You know, there had been this, you know, this thing, you know, time to take aim at our opponents, and a map with target circles on it where all these people were. And the sheriff of Tucson, which is not a hotbed of liberalism, came out and said, would everybody tone this rhetoric down? And if anything, it's gotten significantly worse.
Professor Mockaitis, we're running out of time here, but one last question for you really quickly before I let you go. President Donald Trump has said that Charlie Kirk will receive the Medal of Freedom. Is that typical? What are the requirements typically for that highest award?
That's pretty much up to the president to make that particular call, where you just determine the individual has, you know, made a significant contribution culturally, politically, socially to the country. But as we've seen, you know, with this president, he tends to reward people for their loyalty to him. It's rather surprising, deplorable it was, for example, to have the flags at half mast for somebody who's not a political official or anything like that. But you know, he's again, see, he's making to some degree political capital out of this.
Okay, yeah. Well, I'm sure we'll be talking to you again, Professor Mockaitis. It's always a pleasure. You break it down, you explain it all so well. We appreciate you for joining us on the show.
Okay, have a nice day.
You have a nice day as well. Again, Charlie Kirk, a father, a husband, right here from our very own area, lost his life, you know, believing in what he believed in. And so it has brought up a pivotal moment in our country, having the conversation about, you know, being able to have your beliefs and being able to have free speech. And so this is a conversation that I'm sure won't stop here. We'll be right back right after this break.